Hello and welcome to the official channel of Bombay Teachers Training College, a constituent college of HSNC University. I, Aamna Chunawala, an F.Y.B.Ed student, am going to do a presentation for the course Childhood and Growing Up under the guidance of Professor Dr. Rajeev Aija. The topic that I'm going to do a presentation of, which I and my project partner, Ms. Neha Yadav, have worked alongside on, is the experimental method of research. Now, let us look into what is the experimental method of research. Imagine setting up a science experiment. You want to see if watering a plant more makes it grow taller. That's the big question. Experimental method research is like that. Researchers want to figure out the cause and effect by carefully controlling things. For example, they plant two identical groups of plants. This lets them compare differences later. They water one group more than the other one to notice if they change. They measure both groups and see which one grows taller. This is the what happens part, which is the result that they observe. So, if the watered group grows more, it suggests that watering more leads to taller plants, which in turn supports their hypothesis about the cause and effect. This kind of testing is powerful, and this is how researchers in psychology like Wilhelm Wundt in 1879 figured out how our minds work. But it is not the most perfect method. It can be hard to control everything and apply results to the real world. Still, it is a key tool for understanding humans and their behavior. The significant purpose of experimental method is to predict events in an experimental setting, which is the utmost purpose to generalize the variable relationship so that they can be applied outside the laboratory setting to a larger population of interest. Experiments can be performed on many behavioral topics like attention, cognition, emotion, memory, perception, and so on. Now we will look into the characteristics of an experimental method. First, we have the evidence of causality, which is that experimental studies are the most effective way to establish a causal relationship between two variables. Second, we have the control of experimental elements. By isolating the independent variable and controlling the confounding variables, experiments can minimize alternative explanations for observed changes in the dependent variable, which allows researchers to conclude with greater certainty that the change in the independent variable actually caused the change in the dependent variable. Third, we have possibility of replication. A well-designed experimental studies are replicable, meaning that other researchers can follow the same procedures and obtain similar results. This strengthens the evidence for the causal relationship by demonstrating that it is not simply due to chance or specific quirks of the original study. Fourth, we have randomization. Random assignment of participants to treatment and control groups is crucial for minimizing bias and ensuring that any observed differences are truly due to the manipulation of the independent variable. Randomization hence controls for pre-existing differences between groups that could potentially impact the outcome. Next, we have the manipulation of the independent variable, which means systematic manipulation of the independent variable is essential to establish a causal relationship. Last but not the least, hypothesis testing. In experimental studies, which is typically conducted to test a specific hypothesis or research question. Next, we will look at the types of experimental designs. Experimental designs basically serve as a blueprint for conducting experiments, which enables a valid conclusion about the relationship between variables. Now, a selection of a particular design for an experiment depends on the purpose of that experiment. the type of variables that are to be manipulated, and the limitations and conditions under which the experiment is conducted. There are three types of experimental designs as follows. First is the pre-experimental design. It is considered least effective because it provides either no control group or no way of equating the groups that are used. Under which we have sub-designs, which are the one group pretest post-test design and the static group comparison design. Next, the second design we will look at is the true experimental design, which employs randomization to provide for control of the equivalence of groups and their exposure to the treatment. Under this, we have three subgroups, sub-designs, which are post-test only control group design, pre-test post-test control group design, and Solomon 4 group design. The third experimental design is the quasi-experimental design. This design provides satisfactory degree of control, which is used only when randomization is not feasible in a particular experiment. Under which we have the sub-design, the pre-test, post-test, non-equivalent groups design. This design is considered as the most reliable by many researchers. Now, there are two types of experiments, one which is conducted within the laboratory settings and one which is conducted within the field, within field settings. Now, location-based experiments means that researchers may employ a variety of experiment designs when researching about psychology. Depending on the research objectives, the hypothesis, and the subjects under investigation, each has its advantages and disadvantages. Firstly, we will look at the laboratory experiment, which is frequently used in psychology. It gives researchers more control over the variables. But the disadvantages here is that real-world events don't always match with the laboratory settings. The field experiment is frequently used among social psychologists. It is an excellent tool for observing behavioral responses in authentic environment, and it gives control over variable. The control over variable can be challenging to maintain in a field experiment. Next, we will look at the experimental variables, the different experimental variables. The first one that I'm going to talk about is the control variable. Now, in the realm of scientific researches, control variables play an important role in order to ensure the validity and reliability of the research outcomes. They serve as anchors, keeping the extraneous factors at bay while allowing the researchers to isolate the relationship between the independent and the dependent variables. Now let us see the difference between the dependent and independent variable. The dependent variable is the core element of a research study, representing the outcome or phenomenon that is being investigated, and it serves as the basis for evaluating the effects of the independent variable. And the independent variable holds a pivotal role. It is the variable that the experimenter purposefully manipulates or alters to observe its impact on another variable, which is usually the dependent variable. Another variable we have is the moderator variable. A moderator variable affects the strength of the relationship between a dependent and independent variables. There are more variables that are a part of an experimental research. The three different topics: the steps of the experimental methods, the merits and limitations of an experimental research, and the validity of an experimental research, as well as the threats to validity, are discussed by my project partner, Ms. Neha Yadav. We all understood to the best. Thank you.